Hi everyone, Tim from Chamferzone here. Welcome to the first Chamferzone ZBrush tutorial, and I'm just about to start ZBrush. It's a fresh installation and I just wanted to make that obvious so that you can tell we are on the same page here, where I have nothing installed yet, no customized UI. We're gonna get to that. But just so that you can really follow everything here if you're also new. And one thing worth mentioning, this tutorial was recorded in ZBrush 2019 before the release of the 2020 version, which came out not too long ago. You can follow with either the 2020 or 2019 version. The UI, controls and brush behavior, they all remain the same. We're going to take a look at brushes. We're customizing the UI. We're gonna take a look at Dynamesh and ZRemesher and all the good stuff that makes ZBrush so powerful. For me, it's also been a fairly new thing. I've been working with 3D Max for the last 13 years and I have only learned ZBrush in the last 2 years pretty much, ever since I joined Warframe. And that's gonna benefit you because I can look at it from an angle where to me it's also not the thing that I've been working with the last decade. So I hope that this is gonna be a nice intro video for you. And first thing, let's change our orange in the main menu. I mean, if you like it, you can just leave it, but I'm just gonna show you how to change it. If you click here on that SW2 button, you will see that it changes to a white. And the reason for that is that it picks up the color that is defined here on that gradient. Or you can just click on SW2 and keep the mouse button pressed and then hover over here to that color picker on the left side or anywhere really. And it will pick up that color then. Similar to how Substance Painter also does it with a color picker. And I like to have this light blue. This here, the SW1 is supposed to be the gradient, and I'm just gonna hover it over here on the SW2 button, and that way it also picks up the same color here for the blue, or you can define a different color for the gradient. I'm gonna go on Save UI Colors, which brings up the default folder to save these custom colors. I already have a file here, I'm just gonna replace it. So you can call it whatever you want, and then here you can actually toggle it in case you want to have different looking UIs. Next thing I want to point out that I'm actually working with a Wacom tablet, and I highly recommend you to also use one. This one here is fairly small, doesn't consume a lot of space on the desk, and I recommend it. The main reason why a Wacom tablet or a tablet is recommended is that if you use the mouse, you won't have that touch sensitivity that the pen provides for you. If you tip down the pen hard on the tablet, you get more depth than if you just press down soft. And with a mouse, it will always be the same. So to really get the most out of ZBrush, you want to make sure you use a tablet. The next thing we're gonna take a look at is this Lightbox here. It's the first thing that pops up when you load ZBrush, and you can toggle it on or off really just by clicking on that Lightbox button, or you can press L. And really what it does is it's a quick access to brushes, to textures, to recently saved projects. I don't really make much use of it, to be honest, but this is where you will find that if you want. So let's close it and let's click here on the material button, which then brings up a whole range of different materials. If you click them, they will instantly get applied to whatever object you're working on. And usually I just use the white material. We're gonna get to that later. For now, let's just paint something in here. And you will see that if you use the default canvas here, it's actually a 2D kind of a thing. You don't have a 3D viewport, and you also see that the perspective here and the floor grid is grayed out. And that's because originally ZBrush was actually supposed to be a 2D software. Anyhow, let's bring up our Lightbox and open up a 3D model. so that we can do some 3D stuff in here as intended. Let's double click that dog. Not gonna save that here. Obviously, don't need to save that masterpiece of a emoji. And here we go with our dog. So now we actually are in a 3D viewport. And one thing to also point out that makes ZBrush different to, let's say, 3D Max is that you actually have a resolution here for your viewport display. And I usually just like to have it at 1920 by 1080, which is the same as my monitor resolution. So if you have a different monitor that has a higher resolution, put it to whatever fits your monitor. And once we click on resize, it might seem a little confusing, but now that dog is actually 2D and you have to drag it back into the viewport, then press edit, and now you still see the 2D thing. Just press Ctrl N, and now we have this dog in here finally, and we can work on it in that 3D viewport. Here on the right side we have this perspective button, which by default is on. If you click on it, it will actually change it to orthographic view, which I personally prefer. And then we can toggle on and off the floor grid, which I also like to have off. Now let's press B, which opens up our brush menu. And in here we have all the default brushes that already come with ZBrush. And some of them are the ones that I use all the time, like the move brush here. So let's select that one. And if we use that on the dog here, you can see that it only does it on one side. So let's activate symmetry here on the x-axis, and that way we can actually use it on both sides, which very often we want to use. And since symmetry is such an often used thing, I want to add it to our UI here. So let's go over here to preferences, go on config, and then once we click on enable customize, we are now able to actually rearrange things here in our viewport. So let's go ahead and take these active points here, press Ctrl and Alt, and let's drag it down here to the bottom of the screen. So that now on the upper right, we have the option to get our symmetry set up there. And we have to do that individually for each thing. So let's take X, Y, and Z, and also whatever else there is that comes with the symmetry. And that is, let's go back here to transform, the mirror, and then we have here the radial button and also our radial count for that. I'm not usually using that too much, the radial, but anyway, now we have the symmetry set up here and we can work more on our dog. One thing important for the navigation is if you press shift and left mouse button, you can kind of snap it into, like for example here, front, and now we're in the side perspective. And that's being used all the time. Let's have some more fun here with that still selected move brush. Let's use it here with our symmetry. If you press space, you get that menu bar that allows us to change the brush size on the fly here, as well as other options. And let's, for example, make that here a bit of a shorter looking dog. And you can see how this can be really useful to reshape an object here, especially if you use the move brush here with a very large size. You can also, of course, use it with a smaller size and be way more accurate, such as, for example, trimming that nose here a little bit. Let's go here to the front, give it a bit more muscle. You can see how the move brush is really a useful tool, and it's very useful, especially at the beginning of a project, to reshape the topology and the silhouette. Let's extend our menu bar. Remember, we're still in customize UI mode, and that means that we can drag also brushes that we want to use into that menu, and they will always be available there. Let's go over here to our brush configuration and click on that button there on the left. That will kind of snap it in there. Let's select our move brush and press Ctrl and Alt again to drag it there at the bottom into that bar. So now that we had a look at the move brush, let's go over here to our brush menu, press B, and let's take a look at that ClayBuildup Brush. That is very useful as well. And like the name suggests, it builds up layers really fast here to get some more thickness. And that goes good together with pressing Shift every once in a while to smooth it back out. Right now we're actually still on our lowest subdivision level, as you might see. It looks very rough or low poly. So let's press Ctrl D to subdivide it. And if we go over here to our Geometry tab, we can see that now there is already 2 subdivision steps that we can cycle through. Let's bring up Polyframe to make that a little bit more visible. I was just subdividing once more here. So we have 3 levels. If I go back to the first, you can see this is really the low poly view here. And then subdivision level 3, now we have quite a few polygons here to work with. Pressing the Alt key will do an invert action on whatever brush you have selected. So instead of building up, you can actually carve something in. Let's also take the ClayBuildup and add it here to our quick access bar. And let's go over to our next brush. And that is the hPolish brush. And with that, we can go over some of these smooth looking surfaces here and really make them a little bit more contrasty. You can do this kind of a thing here, this chiseled look that goes very well with the hPolish, and we're also gonna add it to our quick access bar. The next one, and also the last brush that we're gonna add to our quick access, is a custom brush. For that, we select the standard brush, and then you go here over to Alpha and select Alpha 39. Make sure it's Alpha 39, and then let's go over here to Stroke. And over there where it says Lazy Mouse, that might already be open here on my end. You may have to click that. We want to add 0.015 for lazy step. And for lazy radius, we're going to have 20 in there. So now we still have our brush option window open here. Go on Save As. And then we want to navigate to our brush preset folder, and we're gonna name it the Trim Brush. That's what we call it at Digital Extremes, and it's an amazing brush, you're gonna see. Let's press B, and you will see there's a Trim Brush now. Let's select that. And with that selection, we can then also see it here in that window and drag and drop it down here on our quick access bar. And now it's time to save everything here. Our configuration, we want to uncheck this here. We don't need that brush window anymore. And we're gonna go over here to Preferences, store our config, and then let's restart ZBrush to see if everything is saved and if our config is actually working as intended. And yes, it looks like everything is where it's supposed to be. We have our brushes, we have our blue UI, and now let's click on this primitives thing here. By default, we have the perspective and the floor grid on, which I'm going to switch off. Next, let's open up the subtool here. You can see on the top we have our main tool selected, and the subtool is basically as if you open a folder view. The main tool, that's basically the actual folder name, and then if you open subtool you see all the different elements, and right now of course we don't have any other elements. So let's go down here and click on duplicate. Now we have actually 2 elements in here. So I'm gonna go over here and divide that mesh. And now you can see we still have the other subtool over it. We're gonna hide it here. So now we only have that copy pretty much selected. And this basic primitive, as you can see here, even if we divide it, we don't have enough geometry information here at all. So let's see what happens if we use ZRemesher on that. You can see now we have a nice topology here on the first subdivision level, around 10,000 points or 12,000. Let's divide it 4 times. And that brings us to almost 3 million polys here. And now it's time to look at our custom brush that we called the trim brush. Let's just undo that and activate the symmetry here, X and Y. And let's see what we can do with this brush here. If you tip down the pen or click the left mouse button, while holding the Shift key, you're able to draw out that line. If you press Alt key at the same time, it will make a C sub stroke. And if we place that here in combination with the C sub and the C add, we get that nice beveled look here. And I'm just gonna undo it again, Ctrl Z, and start all over here. Press down Shift key while holding Alt to make that C sub operation here. And then followed by just pressing down the Shift key and following that same line. Now I'm pressing Alt again to make that little groove there. And I keep connecting that C sub line with a Z add. I'm gonna increase the brush size, make a Z sub operation here, Shift and Alt. Lower the brush size again back to 25 that we had before. And I'm gonna make a Z add in there. And let's make more C sub here. And just make some interesting looking shape here around that detail. Followed by again Z add around it to get that nice beveled look here. And we can always break it up with a little Z sub in between. And as you can see, we get some nice science fiction looking details here going. And make sure to practice that on an easy object here like that cylinder to really get the most out of that brush. It's essential for the tutorials that will follow. And the more you practice that, the easier it will be once we start with the ZBrush tutorial, because that is basically the most used operation throughout the tutorials. So more C sub here. And you can see how we were already detailing out that cylinder here quite a bit. I'm gonna increase the brush size again to add one of these details here. Lower it back to 25. It is also important to stick with certain brush sizes. You don't want to change it up entirely to different brush sizes, and then it will just end up looking like inconsistent. You know, you want to make sure everything has sort of the same depth, and that is one thing that should be considered when you do that kind of work. So let's have some more Z sub and Z add here. And also remember to snap in. If you press the Shift key while you rotate around the object, it will snap. And also we can detail it here on that front view, connect some of these lines here. And thanks to Symmetry, we're doing it on all sides at the same time and are able to detail out a boring looking primitive into some interesting looking science fiction shape. And remember, we still had our old subtool here, the original primitive. I'm gonna move it out of the way by clicking on the Move tool, just to demonstrate how powerful that brush has been. So we have all these nice details here on that rather boring looking object. And now it's time to load up another object. I think we're done with that cylinder. So let's go over to the Lightbox. Let's continue with a new object here. I'm gonna load in that cube. And before on the cylinder, we were using the ZRemesher. The ZRemesher is basically the button you want to press if you're ready to sculpt in the small details like we were just doing with the trim brush. But let's assume you have an object like this cube here and you actually want to pull out some more geometry out of it. Let's see what happens if we use Dynamesh on that. So here a resolution of 128, you can see how it was basically retopologizing the original mesh, but that won't be enough of a resolution. So I'm gonna undo that and put it higher, maybe to 900. Now we actually have enough polygons here to work with. I'm gonna disable the polyframe. Pressing down the Control key while painting will make a mask for us here. So let's do that, and then pressing outside of it while having Control pressed will invert that selection. Let's go to the Move tool and pull out that masked region that we have here. And then, since we still have our mask active, you want to press Control key and draw a selection outside of our object to get rid of that mask. So now we are then able to actually do more work on that. And let's see here, for example, with our ClayBuildup Brush and having a look at our polyframe. This is the geometry that was drawn out of it. And you can see how obviously we can't do any detailing on that. So let's just click Dynamesh again. And you can see how instantly it was retopologizing that drawn out geometry to an actual frame that we can now work with again. So that is really the use case for Dynamesh, to quickly block something out without being super precise yet. You don't want to commit to small details when you use Dynamesh. Let's have another mask here on that object that we pulled out there. Gonna make it a little bit bigger. Invert the selection, use our Move tool again, and let's scale that a little bit here. I mean, usually you would just have like a second object for that kind of a thing here. But that just is a demonstration here to see how we can work with Dynamesh. Let's get rid of our mask again. Let's see what that polyframe looks like. Again, it's unusable for now, but now we click Dynamesh and we can do further sculpting on that for bigger shapes. Like I said, you don't want to do too many small details. Let's have something here on the side. Let's have another mask. And I'm going to invert it again. And I'm gonna use our Move tool here, center it. If you press that pinpoint button there, it's gonna center that selection. And let's draw it out here with the scale tool to the side. So same principle applies. We're gonna just use Dynamesh to have functional geometry again that we can work with and do some sculpting with. Maybe trim those edges here. And I just noticed that my ZBrush starts lagging a little bit. So I was running some tests and apparently this dynamic button was responsible for it. It's nothing that I need for my work, so I'm just gonna turn that off, and I recommend you to do the same if you run into a slow ZBrush. You can, by the way, always press Control over any button in ZBrush and it will tell you exactly the function, like a mini tutorial. And let's continue. Much faster now here. I don't have that lag anymore. Just gonna smooth that out a bit here. That shape is not pretty, it doesn't make any sense. And right now we're looking at it here within our Dynamesh. So you can see how this is all very chiseled looking, not very nice, the topology. So now comes ZRemesher back into play. Let's retopologize it. And since we had the symmetry on, it also now has this object that we pulled out at the bottom. And you can see how the mesh is now much nicer to work with. Like it's actual topology that we can do some sculpting with. And here on the lowest subdiv level, we can maybe smooth out some rough looking areas like that thing here that happened through the mirroring. And now we have this nice ZRemeshed mesh here where we can do smaller detail work on it with our trim brush. One thing that I recommend to enable is this smooth button here, the subdivide smooth. What that will do is that when the button is pressed, the mesh will be smoothed when you divide it. So let's do that. And now you see we have a really smooth looking object here. Gonna smooth it out a little bit further even with a Shift key. Let's divide it once more so that we have 3 subdivision levels here. And that brings us to 633,000 points. Let's see if that holds up here when we do something here with our trim brush. And you can see it's still not high enough. So I'm gonna divide it once more. That brings us to 2.5 million. And using our trim brush again, now we actually have nice looking details here that will look great on the normal map later on when we bake it. So I'm just gonna use the ZSub here with the trim brush. You don't always have to use ZSub and ZAdd. You can also use ZSub and maybe have a smaller ZSub over it just to change it up a little bit, the way that it looks. I'm gonna have a bit of a bigger brush here to make one of these details again here with a ZSub. And then inside I like to have this ZAdd detail. And back here to our smaller brush size, let's just connect it a bit here also on that other side. Bring it up here. And you can see how now that object, I mean, it still looks ridiculous, but how we can actually detail it. Now that it's not Dynamesh anymore, but a ZRemeshed mesh. Oh, Camtasia 2019, no thank you. I'm still on the 2018 and it works great. So let's have another look here at our Lightbox and let's bring up that beveled cube again. And I want to demonstrate another use case for Dynamesh. Let's go over here to our subtool bar and then we go over to where it says append and we just add more objects to that, like that ring here, which came in way too big. So let's go over to the scale mode. And actually, if you press Alt on the ring, that will select it. Before that, I still had the box selected. Now we can scale that down here. And let's just make it so that it intersects here with that box. And I'm just gonna duplicate that ring and then rotate it 90 degrees. If you press Shift while you rotate, it will do that in 5-degree angle steps. Let's scale it up a little bit and also here to the side. It doesn't really matter as long as everything is sort of intersecting here. That's what we want. And I'm gonna press Alt here on that ring and make sure it doesn't have that little piece sticking out there. Let's make the big ring here more flat. And now what we can do in order to merge that, we go back to our first object, the box. We go to merge and say merge down. Now we have them all as one object, but as you can see here on the wireframe, they are not properly welded yet. So let's go over to geometry and see what happens if we click Dynamesh on that. So let's have a bit of a higher resolution here. And bam, there we go. Everything is now one object here merged together with a Dynamesh. So now we could go over and sculpt some more if we want with the Dynamesh like we did before. Maybe smooth out here some of these edges where the intersections are. And then whenever we feel like, okay, this is now the kind of a mesh that we want to do some more details on, we're gonna do the same thing as before where we use ZRemesher on it. So now you can see again here how the geometry changes to a much nicer topology. By default, that smoothing button here is off, so I'm gonna just turn that back on, divide the mesh, and now we have a really nice smooth mesh here. This was the free introduction to ZBrush. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to leave you with the rendered trailers of the Sword and the Mace tutorials, in which we will create AAA quality game art with a strong focus on ZBrush. Coming your way very soon. Cheers, Tim.